Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, as I was saying before, we're going to have this ceremony where we're going to make the transition from Seifu Shunyu Sue Walter, who is currently our senior head sewing teacher at Ocean Gate, and Sandy will take over. Kaisei Eisho Sandy Musashi. And then a little background, Sue was a sewing teacher at Santa Cruz Zen Center before she came to Ocean Gate 16 years ago. So Ocean Gate opened 16 years ago. And she's guided everyone who's sewn a rock Sue here at Ocean Gate since that time. So Sue started studying under the teacher of Kathy Wilden, who's the teacher at the Monterey Zen Center, and she also studied with Blanche Hartman at San Francisco Zen Center, and Blanche died in 2016. So Sandy has studied with Sue, and she also studied with Jean Selkirk at the Berkeley Zen Center. And Jean is a very meticulous, quite detailed purveyor of all things sewing in Soto Zen. And so Sandy's been working with Sue, and she's been also working with Jean as well, doing various rope projects and also doing the 9 Joa cases, which Jean helped a lot with. And then many of you have been involved also, which I'll say something about later about these groups sewing. So being a sewing teacher in any Sangha is a really important job. And partly practically because most of us don't know how to sew rock Sue, and we don't know how to sew okesa. This is an okesa. Shijun and Gigan are wearing okesa, and many of you are wearing rock Sue. And I'm assuming, judging by looking at your rock Sue, that those of you who are wearing rock Sue have sewn your own rock Sue. So there's the aspect, the technical aspect of getting it cut out, sewing it, doing the right stitches, etc. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of sewing a rock Sue or an okesa. But you know, the sewing teacher also guides us in a deeper way than that. She or he, they put us through they guide us in the ritual of it, but also for most of us, when we sew a rock Sue, things come up. You know, we have feelings about it that come up, and they also help us through that process of working with the things that come through ritual, by being kind to us, and also helping us adhere to the traditional ways of the sewing, which is very important in this process. So this kind of sewing is called NyoHe, and I'll say something about that in a minute. So it's a lineage, you know, in Zen lineage is very important in Zen, and that's also true in sewing. So we have sewing lineages as well. And for example, Joshin, who was the Japanese nun who came to San Francisco Zen Center and taught sewing, she Blanche was her student, Zenki Hartman Roshi, and she received Joshin's bowls, her Oryoki bowls, when Joshin died. Mm-hmm. So that was very, very sacred to Zenki, and she really valued those bowls, and they're quite beautiful, and they were small. It's interesting, they were smaller than the kind of priest bowls that most of us get today. So the sewing teacher is very important, and the lineage of this kind of sewing that we're doing dates back to about the 18th century in Japan, and it's based on studying the kinds of robes that people are wearing even in Buddhist times. So the people who did this study, they went back, they looked at different kinds of robes that were worn by Chinese monks, and they went back and looked at the Vinaya, which is the kind of rules for how the monks lived in Theravada monks today still, but also in early Buddhism. So I'll just say as a little footnote, we have two texts that we've been using. One of them is called Buddha's Robe, which is a booklet put together by Jean Selkirk and other sewing teachers of the history of this. And so everybody who sews a rock suit Ocean Gate gets a copy of this book. But most of the things that I'm going to talk about now come from an article written by Diane Riggs on Fukudenkai groups, who are sewing groups in Japan. And it's just called Fukudenkai, Sewing the Buddha's Robe in Contemporary Japanese Buddhist Practice. So that's a lot of where I've gotten my information. So anyway, lineage is really important. And we have these lineages, sewing lineages as well. And a lot of research is done. And again, you can find it in Buddha's Robe in this article that Diane wrote. Diane Riggs was my first sewing teacher at San Francisco Zen Center. So when I sewed my Roxu as a lay person, Diane was ordained, and she still is ordained, but now she's a professor in comparative religious studies at, let's see, where is she? Western Michigan University, which is in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so Diane has just made her life's career to study. One of the things that she does is she studies contemporary practices, and she goes to Japan and studies with people who sew robes and various things. And so that's what her article's about. So when we sew rakusu, it's associated with taking the precepts. So precepts, as you know, are our Buddhist guidelines for skillful action and ethical conduct. And so when we sew a rakusu, that's I sometimes make a joke. I say, now you're a card-carrying Buddhist because you've done jukai and you've sewn, your robe and all of that. But all the joking aside, taking the precepts is a very serious ceremony. We are expected to take these precepts seriously. And when we take the precepts, it is a time when we kind of make public that we are going to, adhere to these ethical standards that we are agreeing to do. So it's also about, there's an esoteric side to it in which we become members of the Buddhist family when we take the precepts and sew rakusu, because our rakusu is Buddha's robe and we are Buddha. I remember when before I started sewing my robe, I was talking to Diane Riggs at City Center, and I remember we were sitting on this kind of bench. They have this sort of built-in bench that's in the lobby, and I said to her, "Oh, I'm going to sew this robe that symbolizes Buddha's robe." And she said, "No, you are Buddha. It doesn't symbolize Buddha's robe. You are actually sewing your robe as a Buddha." So that was a very powerful statement to me. And those are the kinds of things that come up for you when you sew your rakusu. Some people, it takes a really long time to sew the rakusu. Some people can sew really fast, so it takes less time. But it's not a race. It's about this way that we interact with this process. So when we hand sew robes, in Japanese, it's called NyoHe. And Nyo means something like as it is, or things as they are. And that means accepting our life right now. So sewing is very much about, right this moment, you're making the stitch, doing it right this minute, staying in the present moment. And then Ho means Dharma with a big D, like the teachings. Ho is Dharma. So this is the Dharma of the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha way, the Bodhisattva way. It's also the Dharma of interbeing and how our life unfolds with others, because that's what the precepts are about. The precepts are about our life with others and how we have these relationships that hopefully we learn to be skillful and kind and compassionate with relationships that perhaps are difficult. And then it's easier, of course, when we do this with people that we like, but that we these precepts are ways that we learn, how do we live together? How do we live together in a way that is skillful, helpful, harmonious, and work through the problems that we have together? And the last part, NyoHe, A refers to clothing. So this is the clothing of things just as they are, of the Dharma, the Buddhist robe. So it's about exemplifying being really present for our lives as they're arising and responding to others. And this is the activity of Zazen. This is the activity of sewing, and it's the activity of our life as bodhisattvas. So that's, that's all encompassed in the, and more in this word, NyoHe. So NyoHe refers specifically, you can tell by looking at somebody's rakusu, whether it's NyoHe or another style, which is worn in Japan in the kind of official Soto Zen style. So for example, if you look at these are all NyoHe rakusus. Another style of rakusu has a ring on it, as you can see, and it's also the fold, the way the jos, or those panels, are sewn differently. And so you can tell that way too, the way that the jos look. But essentially, unless you're aware of the details, they pretty much look the same. And this is a regular kind of regulation Japanese okesa. So it works differently. Shijin and Gigan are wearing NyoHe okesas, and you can tell they go over their shoulder, have kind of a flap that goes over their shoulder. And there's some other differences, but that just, if you're just looking at it, that's probably the main difference that you can see between the two styles. This one, as you can see, doesn't go over the shoulder like this, like theirs would, where theirs goes over the shoulder and tucks in like this. This one folds in the front. And I have to say that this style is less of an annoyance, since one of the things about NyoHe okesas is that the flap always comes over and flips down in your ear whenever you're bowing. So I guess, I grew up wearing a NyoHe okesa as a priest, and so you just have to learn how to live with that. And then somehow when you do, then it stays. I don't know what sort of some kind of magic about that, that you come to peace with it. But anyway, so this NyoHe construction is different. And the style of this style of sewing, NyoHe, was developed in Japan. And in the 20th century, this style was really studied by a teacher named Kodo Sawaki Roshi, who's in the lineage of Shohaku Roshi. And so this Sawaki Kodo Roshi believed that this was the true style of Dogen's way. And he ascertained this not by finding a picture of Dogen wearing an okesa that looked like a NyoHe okesa, but they put it together based on some study of the Vinaya and other robes and things that Dogen had written in the Shobogenzo about okesas, but he didn't actually say anything specifically about how the okesa was constructed. So, but Kodo Sawaki Roshi, who died in 1965, was very keen on NyoHe, and he said he called NyoHe the true Dharma robe. So he felt like that style of sewing was a true style of sewing. So San Francisco Zen Center, like many Zen centers in Europe and in the United States and also in Japan, have adopted this style. And it was brought again by Keisai Joshin Sensei, the nun who came over, and she learned it from a disciple of Sawaki Kodo Roshi. So when Sawaki Kodo Roshi became kind of enamored of this sewing style in the 20th century, he really pushed this. And I think, Katagiri Roshi, Suzuki Roshi, trying to think of who else, Maizumi Roshi, they all, I'm not sure about Maizumi Roshi, but those two in particular really continued on that style, as does the Sanzen community, which is Shohaku Okamura's community. So now I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that in Japan, this referencing as NyoHe as being the true Dharma robe is considered kind of arrogant and rude. So it's not nice to walk around and tell people that NyoHe is the real way. And anybody who wears an okesa like this is, not kind of with it. So because at some point, and I'm not sure when this happened, at some point, the Japanese Soto Shu said, this style of okesa is the official style, and that's what we're going to wear. And the style of rock suit with a ring in it is the official Soto Zen way. So if I go to an official Soto Zen event as a person who's registered in Japan, then I'm wearing this kind of okesa and a blue rock suit with a ring in it, which is considered what priests wear is a blue rock suit. You can wear other colors as well, but that's kind of when you go to a meeting or something like that, you wear a particular kind of rock suit. So there are these two different styles, and when it's informal, I've seen Japanese priests wearing NyoHe style robes as well. And when I was in Japan for that month studying at Zuyoji, which is a monastery in Shikoku, they sewed their own robes, so they would be sewing NyoHe style. So it kind of depends on the lineage that you're in. What I think is deeply transformative about the NyoHe style is not the construction of the robes. I think it's the fact that you sew the robes yourself, that you hand sew the robes. And as people are sewing, they are chanting silently to themselves, Namu Kie Butsu, which means I take refuge in Buddha. So every stitch, I take refuge in Buddha. And I'm sure there are thousands of stitches, hundreds in a rakusu, a hell of a lot more stitches in an okesa. So it's like, there's just, I take refuge in Buddha with every stitch, and there's a special kind of stitch that you use. So that's very powerful, to do that, to sit there and do that. And when I sewed my first rakusu, I sewed 3 rakusus, one for my lay rakusu, the second one was I was ordained as a priest, and then I sewed another one when I received Dharma transmission. And I've also hand sewed 2 okesas, one black one for my priest ordination and brown one for Dharma transmission. This is also true of Daijaku as well, or anyone who's a Soto Zen priest who does NyoHe sewing. Anyway, when I was sewing at City Center, and Diane Rakes was a sewing teacher, she was pretty strict, which was great. And I was very, got to do this right. I have to be perfect. I have to have like the perfect stitches, and I have to do all the stuff, and so sewing was actually quite stressful, because when you're trying to be perfect, it's really stressful, because guess what? You can't be perfect. But, I was really working at it. I vividly remember that. And what I've learned since then is that, everybody's robe is beautiful, because everybody's robe, no matter what the stitches look like, everybody's robe is an expression of their sincere effort, because you don't sew rakusu unless you have a sincere effort to sew it. Otherwise, you don't get it done. So there's this way that they're all, individually very expressive. There is a particular way, and when you sew your rakusu, if your stitches are way too big or whatever, your teacher's going to say, well, you need to practice these stitches and get them to be, within a certain parameter of what's considered to be kind of the style. But really, they are really this the representation, if you will, really shows your effort when you look at someone's rakusu. So there's an expression in Japan which is hitohari kokoro o komete, and it means sew stitch by stitch with heart. So stitch by stitch with heart, and that's what sewing these robes is about. So that's the spirit of the robes. So let's see here. In Japan, there are lay groups, often led by somebody who's ordained, who do NyoHe sewing. So, where is that in here? So in Japan, they're called Fukudenkai, and which means Assembly of the Field of Merit. Have you heard of Fukudenkai? So that's essentially what you guys are doing. So when you sewed the Nanjo Okesa over at Sandy's house, and some people in the group were like popping thread, you know, because if you get the thread tight, it means it's silk thread. It means it's easier to use without it kinking up. And some of you were cutting out the joes, and some of you were figuring out the mathematical, you know, sizing and how the joes should be cut and all this kind of stuff. But it was this incredible group effort that all of you were involved in. And I don't know, you guys would meet once a week or so, and you just sew, and yeah. And I know that it was also transformative for you to do this. So, you know, it was great. And when I read this about the Fukudenkai, I thought, yeah, that's what we've been doing at Ocean Gate Zen Center, is we have our own Fukudenkai. And by the way, it's a certain group of people, but if you want to sew and be part of this group, you can just say that you want to sew and be part of the group, and you can be part of the group. So it's not like it's some kind of, you know, thing that only certain people get to do, because there's always something that you can do to help. So when some of these groups, which have different styles, and Diane really goes into kind of how these groups are organized, but one of the things that they do when they're not actively sewing is that they study 2 fascicles by Dogen. The one, Denne, Transmission of the Robe, and Keisakudoku, which is Merit of the Robe. So if you guys feel like doing that, you could also study some of these fascicles, these 2 fascicles by Dogen. So one of the things that our Fukudenkai did was sew the 9 Joa cases, but also this group has, I don't know, Sandy, whether this was the Roxu that you had sewn with Jean, but when we gave the Roxu to Eric, you know, Eric wasn't able to sew. We went down to Tassajara. He took Jukai down there with me, and he gave him a Roxu. So Sue and Sandy did that. Also, the other thing that Sue did was, there was a guy down the street from where we live, in our mobile home park, where Jaco and I live, and he had originally been a student of Maizumi Roshi, and he had done the other style Roxu. Do you remember that guy's name? He had died, and his wife had this Roxu that he'd been working on in pieces in an envelope that was like 20 years old or something. So Sue took it, and we also had the instructions on how to do this other style of Roxu. Sue took it home, she sewed it and put it together in this other style. And then we gave it, and I think I wrote on the back of it, and then we gave it to his widow, which was like really, you know, powerful for them. So there's a whole, you know, kind of wonderful energy that can be passed around through doing this kind of sewing for other people as well. His name was Stan. Stan, that's right. His name was Stan. So anyway, so the Ocean Gate Fukudenkai, they diligently, carefully, and devotionally learned how to sew 9 Joa cases. And each person, as I mentioned, you know, you found your own expertise and place within the group of what the group was doing. And so that, I think that was really wonderful. And I never went to one of these, but I did see pictures, and you all talked about it. And, you know, this practice that we engage in Soto Zen is about group effort. You know, it's about the interbeing of all of us, all of humanity, all beings on this earth and other worlds as well, all functioning together and making this life possible, right? And so this is part of that. You walk with blue mountains, as Dogen would say, you know, and walking with blue mountains is this effort that we put into this life that we live. acknowledging the intrinsic value of all being and all beings, and to see that effort of the whole earth functioning and coming forward. And so this is what it means when Dogen says we walk with the Blue Mountains. So I already talked about the fact that there are different styles of robes in Japan, these two main styles. And then, within the NyoHe style, there are different ways that people make cases and rakusus. There's a style called, what is it, funsoe? Funso, the rag style. I think it's called funsoe, and it's where you go and you find rags and you make the okesa out of rags, and you might dye it, them all the same color or whatever. They're different kinds of fabric, so there's lots of different things like that people do. And so again, Suzuki Roshi brought this other style to San Francisco Zen Center. So Sawakikoto Roshi said that he said the authentic Buddhist robe had to be made by hand with a mind of faith, and that it would therefore be impossible to buy such a robe at a commercial robe maker. Okay, so these are commercial. This is made. I bought this. So you buy okesas in this other style, but I think that's kind of snobby of Sawakikoto Roshi to say that about commercial robe makers, because it turns out that actually part of these robes are hand sewn. You can't do them all on a sewing machine. So even though they're being made in these small, workshops, it's not as if we're talking about, some giant factory somewhere turning out, shorts, Bermuda shorts or something like that. I mean, this is small groups of people who are producing these robes, and they take it very seriously. So I think it's kind of snobby for him to say something like that. And it's also good to sew your own robe. I think it's really great to sew your own rakusu, because it while we could buy them, in Japan, but the thing about it is I think it's transformative. I know for me it was transformative to sew, especially my first rakusu. That was really fraught in some ways with all sorts of feelings that came up and things like that. And you're taking the precepts, as you should, very seriously. So it has this weight to it as well. And so I want to end what I'm saying by expressing my deep appreciation for Sue, for all the guidance that she has given over the years here at Ocean Gate Zen Center. And also, most of the sewing happens behind the scenes. We don't see this. Most of this is happening on, they're not happening during the times that we're sitting zazen or something like that. So you don't see the effort that people are putting into this, and you don't see the teaching that Sue has been doing all these years, and the teaching as his co-teacher here, that Sandy's been doing. But in particular, I want to thank Sue, because she's stepping down from this position, and it's a really big deal. The sewing teacher at a Zen Center is a very important position, and we have been so incredibly lucky to have Sue here in-house to help all of us do this. So Jaco and I are deeply grateful, Sue, for all the effort and work that you put in over the years. And I'm sure they also feel the same way at Santa Cruz Zen Center and all the people that you've taught there. So, now Sue wants to pass the mantle to Sandy. And so Sandy will continue to do the work that she's been doing. And we're also deeply grateful for that. And as I mentioned, it was our intention to do the ceremony today, but Jaco's not feeling well, and she obviously wants to be here to do that. So we'll see what happens with that and get it rescheduled. So anyway, I hope that the talk has been helpful, and learned a few things about NyoHe and okesa and sewing. And thank you very much.